On all of that at Baltimore Luke on Twitter. And if there's any more breaking news on Brashad Perryman, you'll get it first on our WNST text service. I am monitoring all things Orioles as well. Sometimes they're in first place. Depends on which day you're asking, but they're in Boston all week, then home against the Blue Jays this weekend, as well as getting up on the NBA Finals too. But there are books out there, and things come to me on my Twitter feed. This is a guy I started following recently out on Twitter. He is a columnist at Money, as well as an author on all sorts of things in and around sports. He's written a recent book, came out about a month or two ago, on the origins of sports, the early history and original rules of everybody's favorite games. And I'm one of those guys that bought the Dummies book on how to learn the rules to cricket and rugby, and I still haven't figured it out. He is Gary Belsky, longtime author, fighting out of New York, but from St. Louis, Missouri, and we welcome him onto the program for the first time. Gary, first off, welcome on. Congrats on getting a book done. I've written 4 books. Anybody that writes books is a little bit crazy. You have to kind of be a little solitude to get into that business, but congrats, man.
Oh, thanks a lot. Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, my 7th book. I think it's the 3rd book I've done with Neil Fine, who's my partner in the business we run up here in New York. You do have to be a little bit crazy to publish books, but we actually have a great publisher for this book, an outfit out of New York called Artisan, and they make these really beautiful, easy-to-read books that you kind of want to hold in your hand. They sort of believe that if you're going to publish a book, it should be a beautiful physical object. And this is really about history, even though it's very relevant today. We sort of told the histories of 21 different sports, and then in a very quick, fun way, and then we identified the rules for each one of those sports that launched the modern version of the game. So for ultimate frisbee, those rules were from 1970, and for golf, they were in the 1700s. And so it's a cool idea that they helped us execute, and it's doing really well. Like, we cracked the top 500 in Amazon. People seem to be buying for themselves. It's fun if you like sports. And I was the editor-in-chief of ESPN for a long time, ESPN the magazine, and Insider, the paid website. So I love sports, and I love understanding what rules really are.
I mean, I have a book, Dummies, the Orange Dummies book on trying to learn the rules of some of these other, and I kind of find it, and, I'm getting older now. I'm 47. I've been doing this for 32 years myself. I'm an old writer from the News American and the Sun, so that's my first love, was to ask questions and get answers. And, and I think anytime I go to Cooperstown or I, go to one of the Hall of Fames out in Canton or whatever, you explore the history of sports as it goes, and it's not really unlike politics in America, right? There's conservative and there's liberal. There's change the rules, we want a DH, and there's we're never going to have a DH. And in some cases in baseball, moving the fences in, moving them out, the rules don't change much. Baseball is one of those sports where if you came back 50 years later, it would still kind of sort of look the same, other than long delays. And, now we have a replay, and that's another debate. But that really changes the rules of the game when you can go back and replay things, right? Media's done that.
Yeah, honestly, I sort of reject your premise a little bit, because I think that change has been part of every single sport that anybody can think of. And you're right, if you come back and look at baseball in 50 years, it'll look somewhat similar. But by the way, the game of baseball in the 40s, you could also tell they were playing baseball, so it looks similar. But baseball has changed just as much as any other sport, as has football, as has basketball. I actually think there's much more of a parallel to kind of historic landmarks. And what I mean by that is, if you live in pretty much any city, certainly Baltimore, certainly New York, certainly St. Louis, any major city that has a long history, there's always people who say, like, you can't knock down that particular building. That's part of the essence of Baltimore.
I'm still pissed about Memorial Stadium, Gary. I'll be honest with you. Every time, it's hard for me to drive by it,
Here's the thing. All of those buildings that everybody thinks right now are the ones that matter, they were built on top of other buildings that mattered to other people. The era that they're watching, living in, walking in, playing in, is the one in which everything achieved its perfect form. And if we change it, well, you're just ruining it. And it's just silly. I'm laughing at the current sort of debate about what the Warriors have done to basketball. We're relying too much on the 3-point shot. And mostly what I say is, really, do you think that what the Warriors has done to basketball changed the game more than the fact that a few years after the game was invented, people decided to allow dribbling? like in the original version of basketball, you couldn't dribble the ball. So I would say that the addition of dribbling changed the sport in a way that nothing that Steph Curry has done could lay claim to. So people just get conservative, which is fine, by the way. That's the sort of, the push-pull of human existence is change and keep things the way they are, please. I've grown used
Be my point in the whole thing is anytime you try to change anything in a lot of these sports, there's always sort of a baked in history and tradition that allows somebody to stand up and say, well, we've never done it that way before. Why would we have a 3-point line in basketball? I remember when that was a mess and still debatable for the college 3 versus the NBA 3. And now we see, finally this NBA team has come along with, a group of Harlem Globetrotter sort of trick shot artists, right, at that level. By the way, the original basketball, was that like peach baskets, or is that nuts that I think of these sort of, some of it's myth, right, like Cooperstown and Abner Doubleday, and then some of it's proven otherwise. There still are disputes about where a lot of these sports came from, right?
Yeah, so no, it's not a myth. I don't know whether or not they were peach baskets, but they were produce baskets. And the most significant thing about that was it took about 15 years before they actually thought to cut a hole in it, so the game would be very slow because you put a ball in the basket and then somebody would have to climb up on a ladder and take the ball out or use a stick to poke it out through the slab. So, but the more significant thing about that first version was that Naismith, Dr. Naismith, but he wasn't a doctor yet, he just worked at a YMCA and he was trying to invent a sport that could be played indoors during the cold Massachusetts winter. So he found some peach baskets and he used those, some produce baskets, but the significant thing was that he packed those baskets up on the running track that was on the inside of the auditorium at the YMCA in Springfield, Massachusetts. And wouldn't you know it, that running track, the bottom of it was 10 feet above the gymnasium floor. And now, 126 years later, baskets are still 10 feet, even though the average human being and the average basketball player is considerably taller, and we still play with 10-foot baskets. And that was just the luck of the dimensions of the gymnasium in Springfield, Massachusetts, YMCA.
Well, was it made that no one could ever go higher than it and stuff the ball through? I mean, I'm wondering the first time anybody ever dunked, that we would call a dunk at this point.
Yeah, I don't think we know what the first time anybody dunked. I think we know that what the original who was dunking in kind of the early years of professional basketball, and obviously there was a time, I believe, where the rules were changed for a while to prevent dunking because a guy named George Mikan and also I think even Wilt Chamberlain, were so much taller and so much more athletic. Might have been Chamberlain actually, that they tried to ban dunking because they thought it affected the game too much. But of course, soon enough you could get lots of other people who could dunk, and people found that pretty exciting. So, as with almost all things in which changes it comes to a game or an institution, in the beginning people resist it because they think like, well, it's ruining it, and then ultimately enough people get good at it, enough people like watching it that it becomes part of what we have come to expect.
Maybe nothing's been bigger than replay, right? I mean, all of this was adjudicated in real time with the eyes of whatever official was there, and, until really the last 50 years, you had no chance to go back and ever know whether you got the call right or wrong. Now we have it broken down in HD, and we see these tags on plays in baseball now where, they send it to New York, and it's still 50-50 about whether they're going to give it the tie or even when you break it down in still frame. And we've been doing that with Olympic sports and time sports forever, down to the fraction of seconds. That's been going on for 30 or 40 years. But it took baseball all this time to figure out whether somebody's out or safe at second base or whether they did the brush tag or not, right?
Yeah, it's interesting that you bring that up. I don't think that instant replay has changed the games very much. I think it's changed the experience of watching the game, because ultimately, I'm not sure anybody plays the game differently at the highest level or coaches differently because of instant replay. But I do think that this pursuit of kind of fairness and justice, and the idea that if we can know the answer for sure, we should do that, and we're even willing to sit and wait between plays to figure it out. I think that's changed the fan experience more than it's changed the nature of games. But it's an interesting point. It certainly is arguably, I think the single biggest change for the fan experience in the history of sports is the invention of television, maybe radio, but sort of that period between sort of 1915 or 1920 and 1950, when people, all of a sudden could listen to and then watch games from far away. That might have been the single most, significant era in the fan experience. But instant replay, I would argue, it being introduced into the adjudication process, as you say, is probably number two.
The book is On the Origins of Sports, the Early History and Original Rules of Everybody's Favorite Games. Gary Belsky is the author and a longtime editor of ESPN, the magazine, and ESPN Insider. You can find him out on Twitter at Gary Belsky. That's Belsky. Yeah, dude, you do a lot more than this, right? I mean, you write about the real world, the important stuff, the stuff that I like reading about and writing about as well, from, women getting paid fairly to rules for simplifying everything. And you also have like a whole side business as a consultant, right? Since when did you leave the ESPN the magazine? I was a frequent reader of that, and obviously Kevin Van Valkenburg, amongst others down here in our part of the world, who were contributors to that as well.
Yeah, I left ESPN in 2012, really after 14 years, only because they relocated the magazine and the Insider to Bristol, Connecticut, which is where ESPN is headquartered, from New York City, where the magazine and where the website had been located. So I loved it. I loved being at ESPN. I was there for 14 years. But before then, you're right, before then, I was a reporter and writer in business and economics and personal finance. So a lot of the books I've written are about, that subject. And because I was at Money Magazine for many years and I'm still a columnist there, I started writing about a field called behavioral economics, which is basically the study of decision-making, how people form judgments in the world and how they make choices. And it turns out, of course, that making judgments and making choices is pretty much what we do, everything that we do. So the field has blown up. It's become extremely popular, and you're right. I give speeches mostly around the country, a little bit around the country, and I've written a couple books about it. But the firm I have is actually after I left ESPN, my partner at ESPN is a guy named Neil Fine, and he and I started a company called Elland Road Partners. And Elland Road, in case anybody wonders, ELLAND Road, is the name of the stadium where Leeds United plays.
Okay.
And Leeds United is was an old established team in English soccer. It's kind of like the Chicago Cubs or Arizona Cardinals, back in the day of soccer, meaning they used to be good and now they really suck. But for the most part, but our firm, we advise media companies. We help them make whatever it is that they make better. We make videos or television shows or books or magazines or websites. We help media companies figure that out, or we help other organizations, that want to behave like media companies, right? Everybody wants to do podcasts or videos or write white papers or do books. So there's lots of consumer products companies, lots of other kinds of businesses or nonprofits that want to make content, to put on Facebook or to mail to people, whatever the case may be, and we help them do it.
Guys like me.
Exactly. But you figured it out on your own, so good for you, because you've got quite the... I've checked into you a little bit. You've got quite the media empire.
I'm doing my best, Gary, amidst, all the madness around here and battling cancer and watching baseball and touring stadiums. And, I've done some of these bucket list things. Like I went to 30 ballparks in 30 days last year. I'm actually wearing the shirt on the internet today. A year ago today, I was in Pittsburgh, as an example. And, I kind of find what attracts us to these sports as kids, whether it's autographs, celebrity, hometown pride, all of those things that go into that. Later on, there's got to be more going on. And for some people, I guess it's gambling, to be involved. Or, I guess in the modern era, one of the things that I think's really brought women to sports is playing fantasy games and playing gambling games and having a wide receiver from the Detroit Lions on your team that you would want to pay attention. And I think it's one of the things that's really led the NFL to the forefront of everything. Was the NFL found a way to get mom, grandmom, your kid, your dog, everybody involved in it. And the other sports have really, I'm here in a horse racing environment in Baltimore where, the Preakness kind of comes and goes and nobody even realizes they're racing the other 363 days of the year. But the NFL has really sort of captured the imagination of everyone here. And I don't know that it was about the rules or about the violence. I think some of it may have to do just sitting around watching it on Thanksgiving, right? But it's astonishing the way the NFL has taken off during our lifetime to become this big, rich thing in America.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think there's a lot to unpack in what you said. All of it was smart and interesting. I think one of the reasons that women have become a bit more prominent as sports fans is not just because of fantasy, but because because of Title IX 40 years ago or 35 years ago, there's just more women participating in sports.
Sure.
And if you participate in sports as athletes in high school or college, et cetera, then you're just going to end up becoming more of a fan because a lot of fandom comes from understanding the game. So I think that's one thing. The prominence of the NFL, I think, is a combination of everything that you mentioned. Which is the idea of everything that we've been talking about, the rise of television, the kind of similarities between the NFL and video and pinball games, the visceral experience of watching kind of people do harm against each other for the most part and still get up and walk away even if there's consequences later. The quickness of the games, the gap between the experience of playing fantasy football and the commitment you need to play fantasy baseball, right? Rotisserie baseball is super time intensive.
Dude, being a fan of baseball, you spend more time watching the baseball team than you do with your family if you're watching baseball. I mean, if you're watching baseball, it's a full-time job. Trust me, I've been doing it for 30 years.
Remember, there's also the scarcity of product, right? The smart thing about the NFL is there's only 16 games in a season. In baseball, there's 10 times as much. In basketball, there's 5 times as much. So one of the advantages the NFL has is, there's just not that much of it, even though we think oh, my God, I can get a game on Thursday night, sometimes Saturday night, sometimes Sunday and Monday. But the fact of the matter is there's just not nearly as many NFL games available as there are other sports. And there's something, advantageous from an economic point of view for scarcity of product. And the fact of the matter is that, people have a lot of associations with the sport that are based on, I kind of think, civic pride and, like you said, kind of financial investment vis-a-vis fantasy. It's all come together to sort of make the NFL, king of American sports. And by the way, I would argue that it has been king of American sports really since the early 70s. The idea that it's only been the last 15 or 20 years the NFL has overtaken baseball, I think, is a myth. I think football in general and the NFL in particular have been the dominant sport for the past 35 years at least.
Well, we didn't have a team here in Baltimore for a few of those years, Gary, as you remember.
I am familiar.
It's a little dry around here in the late 80s.
One of my first stories at the St. Louis Business Journal, which was my first job out of college, was I had the Cardinals were threatening to leave, and just move to Arizona, which they did. But I wrote a story in which I sort of visited the sort of situation in Baltimore because you guys had experience with a team basically, much worse situation, just sort of picking up and moving out overnight. And there's a lot of similarities between Baltimore and St. Louis in terms of, the kinds of cities they are and how much their football team meant to them, et cetera. And so that was one of my first stories. It was, Baltimore, I remember the headline, Baltimore AC, after the Colts.
Well, and the other part of that would be half of our media department from the News American, whether it's Bob Paston, Jeff Gordon, Bernie Miklasz, all went out there. They all experienced the team leaving and what it looked like to have the team leave. I mean, you're a St. Louis native. Anything you want to say about the, twice now in your lifetime having NFL teams pick up and leave? I thought it was pretty dirty pool, but, look, you were the editor of ESPN, the magazine. There's dirty pool everywhere in sports, man. I mean, I don't think it was ever designed to be fair now, was it?
Yeah, I have a few things to say about that. First of all, the most significant thing about the ownership of the Rams is they somehow made the ownership of the Cardinals seem a little bit, nice to people in St. Louis because, Kroenke, who was way wealthier and his money came from other sources than football, clearly was just much greedier than the Bidwell family ever was. The Bidwell family, in their defense, they made they earned their money still from football, right? That they weren't dilettante owners who bought in because they earned money elsewhere. That's their family business. But also, here's the thing about franchises that move. I'm still an Arizona Cardinals fan because I grew up a St. Louis Cardinals fan. I left St. Louis 2 years before the Cardinals did. I can't really get mad at them for leaving. I left. So there's a part of me that thinks these things happen. And, the Lakers were originally, there's a reason they're called the Lakers, and there's nothing to do with the geography in Los Angeles. The reason they're called the Lakers is they used to be in Minneapolis. The Rams used to be in Cleveland before they were anywhere, right? So there's, this is the nature of life and business change, and people I have a hard time recognizing that, but it's a fact of the matter. And the quicker we get used to that, the more we can sort of understand what matters and what doesn't, and what to get riled up about. And for me, sports is about loyalty, and the fact that I felt loyal to Neil Lomax as the quarterback of the Cardinals and Roy Green when they were in St. Louis, that didn't change a bit when they were playing in Arizona. Like, I still love those guys; they still meant something to me. And so that's why, for me, I couldn't. I was sad for my nephews and nieces who were living in St. Louis because they were sad; they were little kids. But when I left St. Louis, I was an adult, and they left the year after me. And what am I going to do?
Well, you can order Ted Drew's online at this point, probably, right?
Oh, my God. I can't believe you know about Ted Drews.
I know about a lot of things, Gary. I know
That's
about you.
Your buddy Bernie Nicholas must be sending you, frozen. I love Bernie, by the way. Super talented.
Baltimore guy.
He must be sending. Yeah, I know. He must be sending you, Ted Drews via email.
Actually, it was FedEx. Howard Balzer. It was his fault. So
Howard Balzer from the Sporting News.
Yeah, blame him. Blame him.
So funny. Wow, you're bringing back memories for me.
Gary Belsky, author, editor, and the book is On the Origin of Sports, the early history and original rules of everybody's favorite games. You can find him out on Twitter at Time Magazine and Money and all different places out on the web. But the book is new and is selling well. And last thing, Gary, best story in the book is you see it for these 21 popular sports that you've taken on. Not all of them are baseball, football, and basketball. Obviously, there's some other as you said, competitive frisbee for crying out loud. But in learning about this, what was something you knew nothing about when you began this journey?
Well, I didn't know very much at all about the history of rugby, for example, or the history of cricket. Those were two sports that were obviously, and field hockey. The three sports that we have in there that are, not obviously, sports that are hugely popular in America are field hockey, rugby, and cricket. And, the reason to include cricket and field hockey is because at the professional level, they are arguably two of the four most popular sports in the world, cricket and field hockey. And the reason they are two of the four most popular sports in the world is because they are the two most popular sports in India. And if you're popular in India, you're popular in the world because that's about 1/5 of the entire population of the globe. And so that was super interesting to learn those histories and to understand how those games, formed and started. That was as much as anything, we owe the modern sports industrial complex to the success of the British Empire, because as the British, for a period of 200 or 300 years, controlled large parts of the globe, they brought the games they played with them. People were playing stick and ball games everywhere on the planet, but the games that we now know that are, that we are familiar with, that are stick and ball games, they are the rules that were devised by British people or the descendants of British people because, they say that the winners write history. The winners also write the rules of sport.
And centuries later, guys like you and I get to go to ball games, drink beer, eat hot dogs, write about it, and talk about it. It's a pretty good life, right, Gary?
Not a bad life at all. You got to count our blessings.
Hey, man, it's great having you on. I really appreciate you taking some time, and keep tweeting, keep writing, and we'll keep reading, okay?
Thank you, sir. Pleasure. I'm honored to be asked to come on.
I'm honored that you would join us. Appreciate it, Gary.
Take care.
You got it, Gary Belsky. That's Belsky. You can find him out on Twitter and anywhere books are sold, including Amazon. And if you buy with the GiveASpit.com app, you'll be making some dough for our friends at There Goes My Hero, and we always appreciate that. So download that GiveASpit.com app. You can find me out in the Bayou Toyota Audio Vault 24 hours a day from anywhere in the world. On your mobile device, just download the TuneIn Radio app. We come in crystal clear anywhere you are. And, of course, our morning newspaper hits your email inbox each and every morning. It's powered up by Planet Fitness and PlanetFitness.com. Still $10 a month to get in the best shape of your life, and there's a Planet Fitness just about everywhere that you would want to work out, and it's still bikini season. There's plenty of time, and it's certainly the price is right to get in shape. Last but never least, breaking news happens first on the WNST Tech Service. That's powered up and brought to you by our friends at Coons Ford of Security Boulevard. Dennis will be here with you on Thursday, driving you home from 3 until 5. I will be joining him. Orioles playing for first place. Ravens on the backfields in Owings Mills for the mandatory week. All of it up at WNST's Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram. And my email is nasty@WNST.net. We are WNST.net AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore. And we never stop talking Baltimore sports. Thanks.